Orthodox Radio Crusade. Anarchism for the global city. Radical environmentalism for the concrete jungle. Esoteric explorations of the secret history of rebel culture. The Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. Exiled from WBAI 99.5 FM in New York City. Now only on the World Wide Web. Be there.
So Bill's a struggling writer.
This is Bill Weinberg for the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. On the afternoon of Sunday, November 18th, I was walking through the streets of the Lower East Side with Darryl Cherney and his entourage. The day after, we had held a benefit screening of Darryl's new film, Who Bombed Judy Barry, at the Quad Cinema in Greenwich Village. The benefit was for the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space, the Moorish, which is a museum which is in one of our squats on the Lower East Side called C Squat because it's on Avenue C, where we are about to open a museum documenting the struggle to save the squats and the community gardens and reclaimed urban space generally on the Lower East Side over the course of the past generation or two. So the museum was supposed to open on the 17th, which was the day that the film was held. And the reason it didn't is because it got flooded out by Hurricane Sandy. So the film was a benefit for Moorish to do the necessary reconstruction so that they can reopen next month, have their big opening next month, December, which is, in fact, the plan. So the day after the benefit screening, we were walking over to the Moorish. Me and Darryl were walking over to the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space over there on Avenue C between 9th and 10th Streets to take a look.
This sweater. Which means what? It's just a nice sweater, period. No, it means, yeah, this is my swag right here that Kurt put on. Because I want to have the Who Bombed Judy Barry shirt on when I do the interview. Yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah. Okay. We put this away. I guess, yeah. Museum. So traditionally, when you start a space like this, you have to have the zines. Yeah. You know, so there's a free section, then there's the zine section, and then so you want to always have this, and then people put up posters here. Mm-hmm. But since we weren't open yet, we had to give people hints of the posters we wanted. So we went to Philadelphia and said, right? These things, the wooden shooters. Yeah. So this is the kind of idea we're trying to set, like ideas tonight. Yeah, that's not that's rare. I do know it. I don't even think I have it. I don't believe me. I got so much Judy Barry stuff. It's not funny. But I know that poster quite well. Yeah. A number of my friends have it. Well, those are the two we selected. The two, Jane Jacobs. About transportation, about, the two powerful women.
So that's brilliant. You've got Jane Jacobs right next to Judy Barry, which sort of speaks to the theme of this whole event. We brought together the Moorish, the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space here on the Lower East Side, which, is sort of coming out of the Jane Jacobs urban environmentalism, return to the human scale sort of ethic. And with the benefit the benefit screening of Who Bombed Judy Barry, which tells the whole story of Judy Barry and Earth First in Northern California, struggles to save the redwoods and the whole radical environmental ethic of the tree huggers of the Pacific Northwest. I guess it's as good a time as any to say that this is going to be, I believe we're up to the 9th Internet edition of the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. I'm Bill Weinberg, formerly of WBAI Radio, wearing my keffiyeh today in solidarity with the people of Gaza or under Israeli bombardment. And we're here at the Moorish at the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space with Darryl Cherney in town from California. Say hello, Darryl.
Hello, Darryl.
And Bill, time's up. Is that your moniker these days?
Sure. Hi.
Of the Museum of
doing construction today.
Reclaimed Urban Space. Okay, so we should say that the reason it was a benefit for the Museum of Reclaimed Urban Space is because you guys got hit really hard during Frankenstorm Sandy. And in fact, the day yesterday, which was November 17th, was the day that you guys were supposed to open, and you didn't because of Sandy. So why don't you tell us about that?
Well, you were here that night.
Sure. So I got a call, and we're on Avenue C, and the reason why the museum is in the Lower East Side is because we're actually in a squat. A lot of the squats that stood up for the community are in this area. A lot of the gardens, if you look right across the street, are right here as well. So there's so much community right here in the Lower East Side, so that's why the museum's here. Unfortunately, we're kind of in a low flood area as well on Avenue C, and so I got a call. I live in Umbrella House, another squat, which is in that picture. And they called me up. They said, "Hey, it's flooding real quick." And I looked out the window. I said, "I'm on Avenue C. It's not flooding." And they're like, "No, it's flooding." So I hopped on my bike, and I couldn't even ride down my street because right around 2 blocks down, it was so high. So I had to backtrack and come around. And I tried to come down this street, and I couldn't. But there were some people jumping out windows. So I was like, "Oh my God, this is really bad." Because some of the buildings in New York are designed where you actually go down a couple of steps to enter into the lobby. Really poor design for climate change. So they got nervous because their lobby is filling up window, and they were jumping out. So I was assisting them, but then I really want to get to the museum. So I came back around this way, and by this time all the people who were with me I turned around, weren't there anymore. So whatever, I had to get to the museum. So I just rode my bike right through the water and came into the building, came downstairs, and immediately started rescuing some of the stuff in the basement to save what was here and try not to stop the water. I was doing a really good job stopping the water because a couple of days before I'd sealed everything and we had brought in extra pumps and stuff. But the Con Edison plant right there blew up. And when that blew up, it shook the whole building, the whole sky turned a different color. And then the pumps just started stopped working everywhere, and all the systems started backing up, and then the water was rushing through the drains. And then I just moved into save everything mode, but we had flashlights and candles. So thanks so much for that benefit party, because we need to raise money to rebuild the basement. That's why I'm wearing this suit. But it's coming along. This is kind of like the greatest hits area. In the basement, we have like original newspapers from the era, things like that, and a lot more pictures of squats, gardens. So when you go downstairs, it becomes more like a library. But up here, it's different. We're only going back like about 35 years, because when you're telling a story of a different type of history, you better have stuff to back it up. So we have pictures and video, Time's Up does, and other people have been giving it to us, of a different side of history. And so here's Tompkins Square Park, and this picture, how do you know exactly what this picture is?
It was a protest to stop the demolition by HPD, the city, of a building on East State Street,
Yeah.
between E and C.
That's the City Department of Housing Prevention and Destruction.
And we got this from a newspaper, which Heidi got, and then we blew it up. And then this is a really famous picture, as you can see, above the cardboard tank. We like to make a lot of cardboard stuff here. Is a famous eviction that happened on 13th Street. I was actually there, and they brought in this tank. And when this happened, sometimes things happen when the city overreacts so much, they embarrass themselves so much that it changes the way things go on. So they did so much to evict this building, helicopters, everything, that it really changed the way. It saved a lot of squats, actually. After we lost that, we were able to negotiate better because it was so embarrassed. This is an interesting picture. I actually took this picture. This is the building I live in. It's a squat called Umbrella House. And here's this giant caterpillar we made, the same group, Time's Up. It was, at least 12 bicycles long, and it was really big. And we drove it around the neighborhood when the city was trying to destroy community gardens, and it was really difficult. But this is actually the squats and the gardens, very much what the museum is about. So this picture captures both the life of both these things. This is our biggest victory here in New York City, is if you go around, you'll see there's bicycle lanes everywhere. You'll see pedestrian plazas. Bicycling kind of did start for transportation reasons in the East Village. I mean, bicycling was everywhere, but people were bicycling like crazy in the East Village. And then it started going out. And we had this thing called the Critical Mass Ride in New York City, where thousands and thousands of people showed up. and they really pushed the city to change, and people used to hold up their bikes. So it wasn't that they just got bike lanes. They got pedestrian plazas, they got greenways that surround the city. The bikes were really able to push the city like no one else to really change. And now the mayor says it was all his idea. It was great. So that's why we have this history museum. This is Reclaim the Streets. It's an international campaign, and it's all over the world. And this was the first one in New York City at Astor Place, Cube, and Broadway. And they go up on these tripods, so it takes a while for the police. This has kind of copied a lot of this stuff from a little bit of forestry campaigns about putting yourself in a position where it's hard to get removed. And that's what I think the English copied that. They added music. So there's a lot of intertwining of activist stuff. This is a newer picture. Occupy Wall Street on the Brooklyn Bridge. All these people ended up getting arrested. The largest arrest in recent, I think it was like 800, right, Heidi, or something? They all been freed or not? They all got this
Class action lawsuit.
class action lawsuit. So we're bringing it up to date. You know, this is a community center which is right down the block called Char's El Bohio, and we fought hard to say this, and you know, the city sold it. And this is a typical squat being rebuilt. And this is some of the artwork of the community. This is Septa Bachman, and this is a traditional way in a city that you free space. You know, you have to use these bolt cutters because that's how the gardens were reclaimed, that's how the squats were reclaimed. So the bolt cutters are kind of like a symbol of the times. And here we have some sustainable design exhibits all throughout. But the common theme of the museum is when we find out when community thrives, it's not far behind that sustainability comes. And what I mean by that is when they took over the gardens, they had to share, they formed a lot of skill shares, how to do stuff, how to plant, how to get, but in that they had to get their own soil, so they started composting. They had to get wood, so they started recycling it. They also started recycling other people's stuff in the gardens. It was the first place that was recycling happened in East Village. So a lot of these sustainable concepts, like also like bicycling, pushed out from the Lower East Side to the rest of the city. Some of them met with crazy resistance, some of them didn't, but the idea is it was amazing positive stuff for the city. It started right in this neighborhood, so this museum kind of reflects that and shows the history of that.
They closed Tompkins Square in 90 or 91?
He was the editor of a newspaper at the time.
So was I.
Head City?
No. When they actually shut down the park, you know, brought in the bulldozers. Was it 90 or 91?
It was 90.
It was 90, so
Yeah.
it's 90 as well, I should say.
As well.
All right, I have a question for you guys, man. So, May 1990. It occurs to me at this very moment, unless my chronology is wrong, that was when you and Judy were bombed in Oakland, and it was when the police shut down Tompkins Square Park and brought in the bulldozers that same month. Now, I was one of, as a journalist, I was writing about both. I was living here in the Lower East Side, but I was going out to California once in a while, and I was covering Redwood Summer and covering the bombing case, and also I was covering, on a daily basis, I was covering what was happening in Tompkins Square Park for a publication called Downtown, which has since ceased publication. But I'm just wondering, you guys, Bill, you were here in the Lower East Side when all that was going on. You were a witness to it. How aware were you of Redwood Summer and what was going on in the Redwoods in Northern California? And Darryl, you were out there in the thick of Redwood Summer and getting bombed by right-wing terrorists for your efforts. How aware were you of the whole struggle over at Tompkins Square Park here on the Lower East Side at that time? I want both of you to remember. I know you had a lot on your mind at that point, Darryl, but I want you to go back and remember, back in the spring of 1990, how aware were you each of the struggles you were respectively involved in, each other's?
This was before the internet.
It's true, before the internet, that's right. Yep.
Yes, that's before we could possibly know anything.
Exactly.
I kind of heard of it just like everybody else through, the big name thing that attracted everybody.
Which was?
The tree spiking. So it was very controversial. I am a lifetime environmentalist, so, there's different things. And the tree spiking was... The monkey wrenching, I have the book, when they showed that book in the movie last night, whatever I have
Eco Defense.
Yeah, I had it. It was like one of the first books I bought, and then The Sea Shepherd was the first thing I've actually read. So, The tree spiking was so big. It was on the news. It was all over. Of course, it was one-sided, but the idea of like whether to tree spike or not. So that's when I found out about it, and then I did my research, and I found out much more about the campaign. The thing is that the garden campaign, not so much this campaign, which was very similar, were the same people were traveling across the country. So the same people, like Air, who was up in the trees or feeding people, would come here when we had to save a garden, and he'd teach us how to make lockdowns, and he'd teach us all the things with the tripod. So when we were defending the gardens, which I'm not sure what year that was, it was
of course, the subsequent years in the 90s.
Yeah.
It was like the next big struggle. In the 80s, it was about Tompkins Square and the squats.
Right.
In the 90s, it was more about saving the community gardens.
So it was, from my point of view, it was those people who were coming from the West Coast for all that. And then we had an organization in New York City called Wetlands. And Wetlands was tied in a little bit with Time's Up. They smoked pot, we didn't smoke pot. We got there to events on time. They were like 3 hours late. So we used bicycles, they used cars. But they
I like their organization better.
They had a lot of music. We used a lot of boom boxes. So, they were a different organization, but they kept us right in tune with what was happening with trees. Unfortunately, since we're in a city, we had to use their tactics, but we had to use them locally. But a lot of the people who saved the gardens were also connected with the trees. But this group, Wetlands, and Bill will tell you, it was like every night they had updates before the internet. And that's where
They also had a rock and roll club where
Yeah.
all these, famous jam bands got started back in the 90s, back in the early 90s. Yeah.
And they're the ones who educated me. I mean, I saw everything. I knew about all the campaigns and, everything that happened out, with the trees and the redwoods and even the rainforest, all from this group, Wetlands.
So, Darryl, how aware were you in the back of your consciousness somewhere about the whole struggle on the Lower East Side back in that heady days of Redwood summer?
Well, it's complicated, Bill, because I'm a native New Yorker.
Right.
I grew up here for 30 years, mostly in Manhattan, on the West Side. Chelsea, I consider myself a Chelsea boy. And a lot of my New York life, which was my previous life, was much more shallow in terms of the political work I did. Yes, I did do a lot of volunteer work for politicians running for office. The first environmental work I did was with Mobilization for Survival and the big march to Central Park.
1982, Disarmament March.
I still have my T-shirt, yes, with the word staff on the back of it. That was the first time I ever got, actively involved. And then my earliest, shall we say, more organizational work was actually with the Folk Musicians Cooperative in New York, which was not political per se, but it got me involved in organizing how to do concerts and put on shows. So I would only come back to New York. I moved out of here in 1985, and I'd always come back to see my parents. And so for me, coming back to New York was always an obligation. One I love, mind you, but I wasn't coming back here for political work. I was aware, absolutely aware of what was happening in Tompkins Park, but I fled New York. I left during the Ed Koch administration. I consider Ed Koch like the worst mayor we ever had, with Abe Beame just before him being the second worst
Well, we've
mayor.
had some worse ones since then.
Okay, well,
Up to that point.
all right, but New York was pretty much a disaster area when I left. I waited for the subway for 4 hours at a pop more than twice, and that was
Yeah,
it.
New York was special in the
Yeah.
80s.
So I wasn't paying as much attention to New York, even though I was politically active in California, because I had sort of just blocked it from my mind. However, I did read absolutely about the Tompkins Park evictions. I remember that quite well, even though it was in the midst of what we were doing. Because there might not have been internet, but there were magazines, and we had this thing called phones,
Right.
and they worked also.
I remember,
Yeah, although they were attached to the walls.
And you know what?
Very
We had these
inconvenient.
things that I really, really missed. They were called newspapers.
Oh yeah.
You didn't have to charge them. You didn't need any wireless connection. You could just sit there and open them. They had these things called pages. You could turn the pages. You didn't have to load the pages. You understand? You turned them manually. It was really quite ingenious. You'd sit there and drink your coffee and eat your pierogies and get up to date on what's going on in the world.
And I still enjoy reading newspapers tremendously. So I'm going to jump over that time period because a lot of it was an abstraction to me, except for when we organized rallies for the Redwoods in New York City, which we did on Wall Street, I think a couple of times, or maybe once at Wall Street and once at the Maxam headquarters, which at the time was on Park Avenue. I didn't really start to...
Maxam being the
company that did the corporate takeover of Pacific Lumber Company that really happened exactly at the same time I arrived in the Redwoods. I fled New York at 85. I left on Halloween Eve of 1985, arrived around Thanksgiving, going cross country by van, found the takeover of the Redwoods was occurring, and then decided immediately to move to Garberville and become active in protecting the Redwoods. Because I was I wanted to be political. I had been political in New York, but not in any degree with the depth or effort that I have now, or that you here have now. It was much shallower. So when I started organizing rallies nationwide, including in New York. But really, it wasn't until my parents died in 07 and 09. And then we came to Occupy Wall Street with my partner Carrie and Mary Liz Thompson to do a little quick showing of our movie back in just about 2 days before Occupy Wall Street was uprooted. So we did get to see OWS just before they just, ripped the whole thing apart. And all of a sudden, New York came alive for me again. I loved New York up until a few years before I left it. I loved it. I adored it. And then the horrifying things that were happening to the city by the various mayors and their henchmen just made me not like it anymore. So then when I came back to Occupy Wall Street, all of a sudden it bloomed for me again. And I started to understand New York. And if I had that love as opposed to that feeling of self-banishment that I had back in 90, I would have been much more into and following up on the Tompkins Square Park raids and everything else that's been happening here. So if I say that, I haven't given up my New York citizenship, by the way.
Oh no.
I can use, I use the F word all the time.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, make sure that...
No. In that sense, we definitely have not given up your New York citizenship.
No, and I walk these streets well. I can jaywalk with the best of them. That's nothing to brag about.
In a cultural sense, you have very much got dual citizenship.
Oh, yeah.
New York.
Mm-hmm.
So, triangle.
But no, so I was aware of it, but it wasn't in the forefront of my mind. Plus, we were immersed in the Redwoods.
Yes, exactly. We were busy being bombed. So, does Sheila Jameson want to say something about when the museum is going to open? And
we open on December 8th. That's a Saturday afternoon. We open to the public at 3 o'clock. There'll be a party at 8 o'clock, a marching band, refreshments, just a good time. And we also need volunteers, so if anyone has any skills, carpentry or plumbing or construction, manning the front desk, we'd appreciate volunteers joining us. To find out more information, you can get in touch with us by visiting www.morrisnyc.org. That's www.morusnyc.org.
Finally, here we are at East River Park here on the Lower East Side, 6th Street, just off of the FDR Drive. 6th Street overpass over the FDR Drive brings you to this spot right here on the East River waterfront, where I like to ride my bicycle and watch the cormorants dive in the summer. And if we had been here when Frankenstorm Sandy was at its height, we would have been underwater. The water actually rose well above these barriers and flooded the FDR Drive and flooded Alphabet City all the way over to Avenue C. So, we're constantly being admonished, as I mentioned in my last rant when I was talking about how the indigenous campesinos of Peru, in putting their lives, their bodies on the line to protect their highland lakes from U.S.-backed mining companies that want to destroy them, they're really defending the entire planetary biosphere for all of us. I made this point that we're constantly being admonished that no single weather event can be attributable to climate change. And when I said that was back over the summer when there was this terrible crippling drought going on, and much of the corn crop and the soybean crop out in the Midwest was lost. And there was the same, debate which was going back and forth as to whether this is attributable to climate change. And now, fast forward a few months, here we are in the immediate aftermath of Frankenstorm Sandy, and there is this same debate which is going on back and forth. There was this famous, now famous headline in Bloomberg News, yes, it's climate change, stupid. So a sign that the media is beginning to come around to an obvious reality, which I'll get to momentarily. But there's still this backlash to it. As I recorded on my blog, all these media voices are weighing in and criticizing Bloomberg for having made that call, saying that, once again, no single weather event can be attributable to climate change, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's the point. The point is that, that's true. No single weather event can be attributable to climate change. But when you're talking about the crippling drought over the summer, when you're talking about Frankenstorm Sandy coming exactly 1 year after Hurricane Irene, which constituted, I'm 50 years old, been living in New York City all my life, only the second time that Hurricane Irene was the first time, and then next year Hurricane Sandy only the second time that parts of the city had to be evacuated because of storm surge. Never seen storms of this magnitude before. When you look at that, and you look at the shrinking glaciers in the Andes, in Peru and in Chile and in Ecuador, and for that matter in the Himalayas and on Mount Kilimanjaro and on Mount Shasta up in the Cascades out in California, and you look at the fishing villages in Alaska, which are receding underneath the waves. And probably people are aware that there was an Indian village in northern Alaska which sued Exxon and sued the energy companies for global warming, and unfortunately lost because their village was disappearing as the sea was rising. If you look at all of this together, it becomes a dramatically wrong question to ask whether it is attributable to climate change. If you look at it all together, it is climate change. It's the classic fallacy of being unable to see the forest for the trees, to look at each one of these events individually and say, is this attributable to climate change? It is climate change. Take it all collectively, and it is happening before our eyes. And now it's time to move on to the next point in the debate. I am hoping against hope that Obama's re-election and Mayor Bloomberg and Bloomberg News Service, both unequivocally saying, yes, it's climate change, stupid. Maybe now there's been a basic baseline consensus which has been reached about the fact that, yes, it's climate change, stupid. And the denialists and then the Tea Partyists and so on out there who have got everything invested in denying the obvious are finally been dealt the long overdue humiliation that they've been craving for all of these years with their pseudo-scientific denialism. Maybe now we can move on to the next phase of the debate and or actually have the debate that needs to be had as to what we're going to do about it. And we can fight the Obama administration on its technocratic pseudo-solutions such as carbon trading and the abhorrent oxymorons of clean coal and safe nuclear power. And actually, at least some of us, I believe, should put forth the radical solutions of a public seizure of the entire apparatus of the oil industry and the automotive industry, and seizing their vast technological and financial resources and putting them towards reshaping our communities, reshaping our cities, reshaping our workplaces so that they are oriented towards the human organism and human-powered transportation like bicycles and mass transit as opposed to the cult of the private automobile. And if I have to be one of the few lone voices which is going to advocate for an admittedly socialistic solution, well, maybe that's going to be my role of, taking the extreme position so as to, mainstream some of the less radical positions and make them look more reasonable in comparison. But I'm going to be the hard ass who is going to demand that there needs to be a public seizure of the entire apparatus of the oil and automotive industries, and redirecting all of their machinery towards remaking our cities and towards social good and towards saving the planet. That's what I have to say about it. Bill Weinberg for the Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade.
Moorish Orthodox Radio Crusade. Anarchism for the global city.